me personally trying to juggle how much screen time that I was looking at. Like, oh, can I write in something? Honestly, having to relearn how I wanted to be a student. Do I want to write things down? Do I want to highlight? Do I want to make notes? And I had those options. But then also the biggest thing was, oh, that's another upfront expense that I don't have to take on for me or my family.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about your journey in higher ed, because as we've discussed off camera, you bring a unique student turned instructor perspective that I think would really help people see the benefits and situation of OER from those two perspectives. So could you kind of tell me a little bit about your journey in higher ed?
Yeah, so I am a first generation student. I initially went to college right out of high school, and the university that I went to had a rental system. So every class had the books provided for you. You swiped your student ID card, you went to the library, they gave you the books, and as long as you returned them at the end, there was no money exchanged. And then when I left college for the first time, I worked in the workforce for probably close to 10 years. And then I had the opportunity to come back. And so it was really a journey of trying to figure it out. Being a first gen student, you don't have people that have gone before you laying out the map of what that looks like.
Yeah. What are the expectations? What am I going to see here?
Right. Right. So figuring out student aid and what all that entails, being a mom and somebody that had been working and leaving that income to come back to school, I was aware that there would be upfront costs outside of like the tuition and fees coverage. What I was unaware of is how close to the start date of class you'd actually get all of that information of how much the fees were for books and supplies and other things like that.
Maybe even what is the book?
Right, exactly.
Not just how much does it cost at this institution.
Where do you find it? Can you find it for cheaper? I was unaware until this class that there were even some embedded textbooks that were free access resources. So that was honestly just like a moment of panic for me of like, I was not prepared for this level of financial commitment right up front, on top of trying to come back to school 10 years later, trying to manage my bills and being down in income. So that kind of led me back to my journey here at UIUC to finish my bachelor's and then my master's.
What are those in?
My bachelor's is in community health and my master's is in public health.
And so on this specific course, what was this course that you were in that you got to experience some of this OER? And can you tell me a little bit about your view on the value of OER from a student perspective? Yeah,
absolutely. So the course that I took with my first OER resource was drug use and misuse. And hearing just right off the bat that, hey, everything that you need is embedded in this Canvas page. You don't have to go looking for it. You can print it if you want. So that was another option of me personally trying to juggle how much screen time that I was looking at. Like, oh, can I write in something? Honestly, having to relearn how I wanted to be a student. Do I want to write things down? Do I want to highlight? Do I want to make notes? And I had those options. But then also the biggest thing was, oh, that's another upfront expense that I don't have to take on for me or my family. And it really just allowed me to shift my focus into taking the class of like, okay, I have everything that I need right in front of me. I can start consuming the content of it. And it was very easy interactions with the text. It's pretty seamless, pretty accessible. I personally don't have any accommodations that I need. But I could see how that could also be beneficial for students that need those accommodations.
Sure. And it's not always the case that if a class adopts an OER, that the author of said OER is their teacher, but that is your experience, right?
Yes.
So you get this really great seamless connection, right? It's not, oh, the
Right.
textbook is teaching about some things. Do I have to open it? Maybe I have to open it. Why did I buy it? Your teacher was your author.
Right.
Could you speak a little bit about how the class kind of worked in that way? I know you were talking about the benefits of an author like Professor Bazan, I guess I could call her.
Yeah. So it's so interesting, especially in public health. You can tell the difference when somebody's really connected to the work and really passionate about what they're talking about. And Christy had lived experience for a couple decades and what she was talking about. And you could tell that when she would talk about what she wrote about, that it was a very personal connection and it made you want to be connected to it too. And I think it highlighted different ways that I would have connected to the text had she not been the author of, oh, okay, she thinks that this is really important, so I need to really pay attention here. And this is what she's highlighting and why. So that was a really great experience. I just remember my takeaways from that class of it was so impactful. It was a required class for my focus, which was health, education, and promotion. And it allowed me to see the context of what we were talking about, somebody that might struggle with drug misuse and have a level of empathy and see it in a whole different light than I would have, I think, if I had just been more disconnected from the text.
Well, it's such a great confluence of the subject matter and the course objectives, who you're looking to serve with the goals of this course, with what you were talking about the ivory tower kind of conundrum of all of this inaccessibility to the material, to the language used. And I feel like your perspective is so apt for talking about this because you came back to higher education after working. So you're picking up on these themes of this is useful out in the world. Versus maybe
Absolutely.
an 18, 19-year-old who's only ever been in school and will still be in school for a while, might not be looking for those things. But the fact that you were picking up on them through the OER helps kind of propel how you're going to use it. And since it is open, you could keep using it, the type of thing. It's not like, oh, it's just a dusty textbook that had a bunch of quiz questions in it. No, it's something I could return to, is written by somebody, a working professional.
Absolutely.
That sounds like a really unique combo. And you were talking about your transition into you've done some instruction.
Yes.
So could you talk a little bit from that angle of, how you see OERs useful as an instructor role?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the current class that I'm teaching has a lot of first generation students, a lot of students from underserved populations, students that English is not their first language, students with needing accommodations. And I think one thing that, having previously experienced the OER as a student, allowed me to have so much more grace for the mental load coming in for freshman students that are their first generation or coming to a big university at first. I think it just highlighted the need for accessibility and just removing one more of those barriers. I don't think that, like, when we say, oh, I'm providing you a list of things that you need, I don't think that it's necessarily taken into consideration all the time what burden that puts on that student coming in. If they don't know where to go find a textbook, if they don't have access to have it shipped to them, or
if they're reading online that you probably don't need this book.
Right, absolutely.
It's like, do I or don't I? It said required. I'm reading online. Students are saying I don't.
Students having somebody in their corner, especially their instructor, of like, yes, we're not trying to be tricky. We want you to just take in this really valuable information, helps them to gain confidence and to know, like, what resources are even out there.
Yeah. I would even plus one from your description of what you recognized through that course. there's an invitation and an open road to participate after you kind of got that consuming mentality done. If you've got energy in the bank, if you're committed to this subject material, it sounds like the way it's arranged, it calls people to participate more.
Right.
You talked about the adaptability of the resource, not only from the kind of permission structure that people can at times change it if needed, and accessibility, but also that kind of like the authorship layer is helped, but then like, what do you want to do after it? Kind of like it's not as cemented in stone as some of our previous models of
Right.
like the change process. It can be more nimble
Right.
going forward, and iterative changes to make sure the course kind of stays on track, that sort of
Right.
thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gaining confidence in how this new world operates. And I think that that's been something kind of confusing for students, especially first gen students, or just students that just aren't familiar. Like, academia is a very unique world. And if you don't have somebody in front of you really just like speaking life into you and helping you navigate it, it can be so daunting. And I think those like silent arguments that you have of like, I'm not meant to be here, like something as simple as an accessible text removes one of those barriers.
Yeah. And that's the last thing that I wanted to ask and get into in terms of looking ahead. You kind of mentioned this, what type of landscape are we moving to? And I know of and I hear of kind of arguments of sustainability of these models. If it's all open and it's all free, who's paying for that?
Right.
We're fortunate here to have some grant opportunities to enable some of that activity. But yeah, where do you see it going? What's your future look like? How are you thinking of advocating for some of these principles in these ways?
I think that is a very tricky question,
Well,
because
nobody has a crystal ball.
Right. But I think a lot of it is priorities, right? Like, my focus is public health, health education and promotion, health behavior and promotion. And I think one of those things is the value that everybody deserves education in some sense. And I do feel like when you have people that have lived experience in something that can't not be taken into consideration. And so I think encouraging individuals that have more lived experience in something, maybe instead of or in replace of traditional education, you're going to have a lot richer resources. And I think also encouraging like the ability for people regionally, like, so something that might be an issue in rural Midwest is not going to be interpreted the same, presented the same as something that's an issue in another country or even in a more populated area on the coast. So I think having more resources is never a bad thing. And that's kind of my hope for the future too, especially as there are people breaking generational cycles and wanting to pave a new way forward for themselves. I think having these open resources is super important to that.
Thank you so much for sharing some of your academic journey and your perspectives. And I also hope for some of that future. That would be
absolutely.
great.